Hello, this is our last little instructional video on linear models, and this is really more of the extension activity with interpreting um, the parts of the linear equation. So we're going to be looking at interpreting not just the y-intercept and the slope, but also, since we've got the equation, interpreting the x-intercept by figuring out what it is algebraically, and then matching them up to the sentences that we have over here on the right-hand side. So we're going to start again with the three reads. It says a submarine is below the ocean surface and is ascending at a constant rate. The equation that models this situation is D equals 7.5 m minus 200, where D represents the depth of the submarine after m minutes. Okay, now if we're going to think about what that is, this whole thing is you just have a submarine way down deep below the surface of the ocean and it's coming up to the surface. That's basically what that is. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the three reads. That was the first read. The second read is to put in our slash marks after our periods. Okay, and I'm also going to do one at the end. And since I've got a comma here, I'm going to show you how some people like to do it also at the comma as well, just to split it up a little bit more. So now I'm going to read the first chunk. A submarine is below the surface of the ocean. Okay, good to know, sets the scene. It's good background information, but there's nothing really mathematically important there. So I'm going to go ahead and mark through it. Second section, it's ascending at a constant rate. Mathematically, there's no numbers there, but there is a clue word, ascending. We talked about descending below before, meaning going down. So I am going to write this one down because I need to remind myself later that the graph of this thing is going up because the submarine is coming up. It's ascending. And since it's ascending, it should have a positive slope or rate, whichever one we're going to call it. Okay, so that is mathematically important to sort of keep in our mind and our memory. So I'm going to write it down to remind us. Okay, the next section, the equation that models this situation is D equals 7.5 m minus 200. Okay, if they give you an equation, you need to write it down. That's an important part of it. So I'm going to write D equals 7.5 m minus 200. Then the next part, where D represents the depth of the submarine in meters. Okay. Also, if they tell you what the letters represent, you need to label them. So I'm going to label that the D is depth, and this is in meters. Okay, and then it says after m minutes. So m must be the minutes. And then one other thing that's always very helpful to do also is to write it in that form that you're used to looking at, which is the y equals mx plus b. So if I change this to y equals, and I'm going to leave the letters there, 7.5x minus 200. So that's in that mx plus b format, but that also shows me that the y is the same thing as the meters, and the x is the same thing as the minutes. Okay. Now there is no, let me cross this out. There is no per each and every here, but if we remember that when we look at the equations of y equals mx plus b, and I will write it down here, and this is why we do this, the m is the rate or the slope, and it's always the number that's with the letter. So if I look up, and I'm going to highlight that down here in yellow, or excuse me, in blue. Okay, so the rate is the one that's got the number and the letter. That would be right here, 7.5x. That's the same thing as right here, 7.5m. So I know my slope is 7.5. And that's a positive slope, so it's going up, which means it's ascending. So I'm going to write myself just some little notes. going up. It's ascending. That's a positive slope. And it has something to do with minutes because the 7.5 is connected to it. And also, if you go back up to the top, it says it's ascending at a constant rate, and it talks about meters and minutes. So this must be that it's going up 7.5 meters every minute. But even if you weren't sure about that, you know that minutes is connected to it. So somehow this has something to do with minutes. So I'm also going to put that over here by it. You may not be able to decide that it's 7.5 meters per minute, but you know it has something to do with minutes, and that's a good thing to know. It doesn't mean it's 7.5 minutes, it just means it has something to do with minutes. Okay, now the y-intercept, if we remember looking at it, the y-intercept is the b number, what I also like to call the starting value. This is also called y-intercept. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that in a different color. I'm going to try to use yellow now. So now we're going to be looking for the y-intercept, the b value, and you'll notice that's the number that's by itself. So that would be this 200. And since the 200 has a minus sign, that really translates to a negative. Okay, so I'm going to put that here. Now, if you're wondering, well, what is that about? Okay, well, if we're trying to think, what is this about? This is about, remember what the y is about. This is a y number. Y-intercepts are y numbers. And if we look at what the y number is about, like right here, the y number is about the depth in meters, which is why it's good to, make sure that you label these things from one equation to the next where you changed from the d and the m to the x and the y's, okay? Because that will actually help you try to figure out what these things mean and what they're talking about. Since the y is referring to the depth in meters, then we know that negative 200 is negative 200 meters because it's a y number, so it is referring to the depth in the meters. So I'm going to go ahead and label this that it's negative 200 meters because it's down below the surface. I'll actually write that a little better. Now I'm going to look at these answer choices over here because I'm going to try to match which one of these four answer choices goes with the slope, which one of them goes with the y-intercept. And realize I'm looking at something that's talking about, going up over minutes for the slope and something that's talking about being down below sea level for meters for the y-intercept. It doesn't have the numbers in there, but we can still interpret it. So one of them might be the number of minutes it takes the sub to reach the surface. Okay, well, neither the slope nor my y-intercept, the way I have them labeled, is talking about reaching the surface. So I'm going to say, nope, it's not that one because I'm not talking about reaching the surface. Okay, the second one says the meters that the submarine climbs towards the surface each minute. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting because it says climbs toward the surface. That would indicate that it's going up and that it's each minute. That looks like a good interpretation of what the slope might mean. That you're going up, you're climbing those 7.5 meters towards the surface each minute. So I'm going to say that this one goes with the slope. That's what that number is talking about, that it's 7.5 is the meters that the sub climbs towards the surface each minute. Now the third one says the meters that the submarine sinks toward the ocean floor each minute. Well, it does have the each minute, but we know our sub isn't sinking, it's going up. So it's not this one. This one's not one of them. So I'm still trying to figure out the y-intercept. It looks like it's probably going to be the last one. It says that the y-intercept is talking about the depth of the submarine when it started ascending. Okay, well that looks good because it's mentioning the depth of the submarine and when it started, and that it's ascending. And we know that the submarine was 200 meters below sea level. That's that negative 200. And it did then start ascending. And remember, the y-intercept, also called the starting value, is what is happening or where you are at the start, at the beginning. So that's a really good one as an interpretation for this negative 200. It's the depth, the meters of the submarine, where it was when it first started going up. So that's how you can sort of pick out what the slope and the y-intercept would mean just from, say, the equation by deciding what those numbers are and then looking at some labels to give you an idea of where they go from there. Now, as far as the x-intercept, you may be wondering, well, okay, but how do I do the x-intercept? Well, that involves a little algebra. So I'm going to go back here and we're going to do our basic sketch again. I'm going to go down here. And if we remember, our x-axis is about minutes because x is minutes. So I'm going to label that. Our y-axis is about the depth in the meters. So I'm just going to label this depth. And we know that that's the meters. And we know that our starting value, which is our y-intercept number, is at negative 200. Okay, well, the way I've got this written, I'm actually going to have to move some stuff around because the way I've got this written, I'm going to pull this over here, is I'm showing a positive y, and if we're at negative 200, I need to show negative y. So I need to go ahead and extend this out. Oops, I use the same color though. Extend this out to show the negative part of the y-axis, and where my sub would be down here at negative 200, and it's going up. Okay, so it's in the bottom part, and if you want to extend the x-axis out here so that you can see more of that, you can as well. So it's going up, and when it hits the x-axis, that's when it reaches the surface. Now, and that would be however many minutes that it took. Now let's once again realize that since this is an x-intercept, we're talking about right here when the y is a 0. Because when we write x-intercepts, we put the number here and the 0 in the y spot. So if I go back and look at my equation, which I'm going to write over here, I've got, and I'm going to use the x's in the y version, y equals 7.5x minus 200. And I know that I'm looking for the spot when y is 0. So I'm going to put a 0 here. Everything else I'm going to leave the same. And then I'm going to solve it just like before. I need to move that 200 over, except this time it's connected with a minus sign, so the opposite of that is a plus. And the 200 cancels. 0 plus 200 is just 200. Bring down your 7.5x. And then, just like before, there's nothing in between the 7.5 and the x, so we can put the multiply symbol. But then the opposite of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide 7.5 on both sides. So then all we have to do is get 200 and divide it by 7.5. And that will give us about 26.7. It's not approximate, it's not exact. So I'm going to come over here and label this at 26.7. So realize what that means is that at approximately 26.7 minutes, the sub reached the surface. So that number, 26.7, being the minutes that the sub took to reach the surface, would have actually been this first option. It wasn't the slope or the y-intercept, but that is the x-intercept. It's the number of minutes it takes the sub to reach the surface.